Welcome to another edition of the SprintCarUnlimited.com deep dive presented by Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA. This is a historic deep dive in that it's our first two-parter with our guest Steve Beitler, who tells us the truth about the Doug Wolfgang crash at Lakeside Speedway in 1992. Before we get to Steve, Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA is your one-stop shop on the way to the races. They have fresh made sandwiches and subs with all the fixins. Perfect for a night at the racetrack. Dottie's has everything you need in one location, including a full-service deli, a wide selection of groceries, and gas. If you're looking to dine in, head over to the Hive Coffee House and Cafe for a great sandwich. There is a seasonal greenhouse on site, and coming soon, Dottie's Crab House, where you can dine in for fresh seafood and all-you-can-eat Maryland crabs. Head over to the corner of Canal and Bull Road in Dover, PA. Dottie's Family Market has you covered. Now here's Steve. Steve, welcome back to the deep dive. It's a week later. It's part two, and you're the first part two guy, so that's a good thing. You live in history of the SprintCarUnlimited.com deep dive.
Well, good. I guess there's something interesting that we want to talk about, so I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah. So after the deep dive last week, and this is on me, I mentioned it on my Tuesday deal, the live show I have. You know, you mentioned the Doug Wolfgang crash. It was April 3rd, 1992, Lakeside Speedway. And people wanted to hear about that. And for some reason, I don't know if I just blanked out on it last week or whatever. So I wanted to have you on to talk about this. And I know, and some safety in the years after that event, so on and so forth. So, you know, Steve, I think that when this happened, were you in the same session, or were you in the pit area when this happened? Where were you kind of located when Wolfgang, I guess he hit a Uke tire on the inside?
I was right across the racetrack from the Ute tire on the outside. So this is a pretty delicate subject. I haven't really talked to a lot of people in depth about this, but it's been over 30 years, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of stuff that wasn't factual that came out, and I just kept it buried all the time because I knew the truth. And so if we're going to do this, let's just back up and walk through it.
Floor is yours. Go ahead.
Fortunately, one thing that really helped me through this whole ordeal was I've been a firefighter for about 10 years before this, and an EMT, and I've been through a lot of training, a lot of scenarios, but we went to Lakeside and on a practice day, and I wasn't getting around real good. They had a practice and they had a break. We had a press conference, and I ended up sitting next to Doug in the press conference. We were visiting a little bit, and I told him, I said, man, I'm just not getting around good. There's something I ain't got figured out yet. And I was in the first session after the press conference, and he said, well, I'm in the second session. He says, come up and watch me and watch my car. And I said, all right. So I got out, went up, and standing right outside turn 4, right there where you go on the track. And I watched Doug, and he was rolling around pretty good. And he got held up behind some slow cars, and they were kind of side by side in front of him. He couldn't get by him, and I could see he was getting frustrated. So when they dropped the checker, they slowed down. Doug pulled out and took off for a hard lap because he hadn't really got a good lap in. And down into 1 and 2, down the back section, he come into 3 and 4 hard. And, the car skated just a little bit, but it got his nose down, and his left front hit that big Uke tire. And the car, he hit it, and the car went up, the front end come off the ground, and when it slammed down, his foot hit the throttle, and he went straight 3/4 angle straight into the fence, wide open. And when he hit the fence, I knew he was hurt because it sounded like an IndyCar crash. I've been in Indy and heard him hit the wall. It was that loud, just that thud, the metal breaking, the engine screaming for a few seconds. And as soon as he hit it, then the car just started sliding down the track. And I just instinctively ran over and jumped on my quad. I was going down the track. And as I got down the track, I could see a small fire under the fuel tank area. And I thought, okay, no big deal. It's just a little fire. Let's go up and make sure he's okay. And there was one guy in firefighting gear, bunker gear, like from a fire department, come running out, had a small extinguisher, and he stuck it right down in the fire about, a foot and a half away and pulled the trigger, and it blew fuel everywhere. And it went from a small fire to a huge fire immediately. And it's like, I screamed at him to stop, because you're just pushing the fuel around. And he got up there and, he was on fire everywhere inside the car, and he was slumped over. And the first thing I tried to do, I didn't have my gloves on, I didn't have a helmet on, nothing, because I was just there watching him practice. I tried to get the steering wheel off, and by then the quick release was already so hot. And I reached in and grabbed it, and it instantly burned my fingers, and I couldn't get the steering wheel loose. It was jammed. The quick release was jammed. It wouldn't come loose. And, there's no fire extinguishers. They had two guys. The honest truth is they had two guys on duty that day. One of them was from the fire department. Another one was a friend of his that came out, and he had a driver's suit on. Neither one of them had gloves. Neither one of them had head protection. And there's just a couple small extinguishers, and those were dumped quickly. And Art Maley's from Working Woody, he was right on the scene too, and he brought the fire extinguishers he had over there, and the fire was just growing because on the asphalt we had to run full belly pans because they didn't want any oil leaks getting on the track. Well, full belly pan goes clear back behind the seat, and I guess they determined later that it broke the fuel filter inside the car when he hit the wall. I don't know if his leg hit it or something, but his fuel filter. So he had probably a 3/4 inch line just dumping raw fuel right into the belly pan, and he's basically sitting in a pan of burning fuel. And I mean, it was all around him, up around his arms, his legs, up over the dash. I mean, the main fire was inside the cockpit, and there's no fire extinguishers. It turned into chaos quickly. And Mark Kinzer had enough time, put his helmet on and stuff. He's heading out. His dad, Mark told me later, his dad told me, he said, tell him to hook the tow truck and get him out of the fire, out of the puddle. He's on fire this whole time. We're trying to get him out. We're trying to pull the seat back. Tow truck backed up to him and hooked onto the front bumper and started dragging the car down the track. I mean, I still remember his body's just bouncing in the car. We had the seat belts undone. And drug him out of the big pool of fire. And I went back inside and I was trying to pick him up out of the seat, and I could see the fire following the trail of fuel right up the track. And now when it hit this time, it really went up. And I mean, I was on fire. My hands were getting burnt in my face. And I had to bail out of it. And remember Roger Lee's camp was right there, and he was on his hands and knees with the rag trying to put my legs out because the fuel was on my legs and they were burning. And I finally, somebody gave me a head sock to put on, and I asked one of the fire guys because he was just standing there. I said, give me your gloves. He refused to give me his gloves. Somebody else, I don't know who it was, threw me a pair of gloves to put on. And Mark was on one side of the car. By now there's several people that was around the car, and it's pretty chaotic. They're all yelling for we need fire extinguishers or something. And we went back in, and I was able to get the seat pulled back. Doug always ran hunt seats, and hunt seats are a single layer seat. They weren't the double wraparound seats. I mean, they were fairly thin, lightweight seat. So we were finally able to pull the seat back on the left side and get under his arms and pull him out. I had read in one of the articles that when the crash happened, that they called it in and said, be on standby. We've got a bad wreck out at the racetrack. And when they radioed in that we have the driver out of the car, was nearly 7 minutes. And the car's on fire the whole time. It was at the point that they couldn't get the flag stand open because it was locked. But it was at the point where there were people bringing bags of ice out of the concession stand, throwing them to the flagman or whoever's up in the flag stand. He was throwing the bags of ice, and the people were throwing the ice on the car, trying to put the fire out to get him out. He sat in the fire that long. It was hideous. We got him out and took him over and laid him down on the ground. And I mean, the scene was like, it was like being in a horror movie.
Take your time.
And he was laying there on the ground, and his whole body, he had a black driver suit to begin with. His helmet was burnt, the shield was melted in on his face, and there was just smoke coming up from his whole body. And being an EMT, I said, give me some saline, get me some scissors. And I said, get his airway open. So the other guy that was with the ambulance was working on his face, trying to get the shield off and working on his helmet. And I took the scissors, and I could see that his suit was burnt through on one knee, and it was burned really bad around his ankle. And I started cutting the suit off, and fortunately, back then he wore the Design 500 suits, were really some of the best you could buy. And he cut the suit. I started cutting the suit off all the way up to his crotch. And I remember looking, and he had his Nomex underwear on. I was like, thank God he had his underwear on, because it would have been worse. And I thought, man, it looks good. And then I cut the underwear off, and the flesh and stuff just literally slid off his shins. It just come off his legs, and I knew he was in trouble. And I knew he had to get the heat out, because it was just going to continue to cook him. So it packed his legs all the way up to his crotch and area, everything, just packed it completely full of ice. And they finally got his helmet off, and I could see his nose was burnt, his face was burnt. I know one finger was burnt really bad. I could see it in his hand. And, when I was cutting the pants off, his suit off, I remember looking up, and his wife was standing there, and she was 8.5 months pregnant, at his head, stamping her feet, just screaming. And I could hear when I'd stepped back from the car, when my legs were on fire, and Roger was on the ground trying to put the fire out on my suit, I could hear she was stamping her feet, screaming, somebody get him out, for God's sakes, get him out of the car. It's like, I was scared at that point. I never really get scared, because that's one thing they teach as a fireman, think, don't panic, always keep your cool. I got scared because I thought we weren't going to get him out then, and just had to go back in. And once I got his legs, I packed him in ice, and they were trying to get oxygen and stuff on. The helicopter landed then. And he did start to move his legs a little bit, which was a good sign, because I knew that at least there's no paralysis, and the fact that he had some feeling and some stuff like that. And they loaded him on the gurney and put him in the helicopter, and they took off out of there with him. And I was just kind of in shock, because I really thought he was going to die. I mean, I've been around a lot of burn victims in my life, and I've seen a lot of people that's been burnt that never made it through it. And he was burned as bad or worse than any of them that ever survived. And then I realized, I had second and third degree blisters on my hands and fingers, and I know my leg was burnt. And so they wanted to take me to the hospital and get me dressed up. And I was in there, and I talked to one of the doctors, and they just said, the next 24 hours is going to be really important for him. And, I was pretty upset to have to. It bothered me, because that could have been me. It could have been anybody, but it was a friend. And I'm thinking, I was a pretty big guy. I was always, in the 220, 230 range. And so I called my dad. My dad was a firefighter also back home there. And you didn't have the internet or nothing back then. And I called him, and I said, hey, I just want you to hear this from me before the rumors get out. And I said, there's a bad one today. And I said, I got burnt. I said, I'm fine. They got me bandaged up. I'm good. But I said, Dad, I've never seen anybody burnt this bad that lived. And I was pretty upset. And I got a ride back to the hotel, and it really set in that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed and bawled. I mean, I couldn't help it, just because, if that had been me, they'd have never got me out of the car. Doug was, I'm guessing he was, I don't know, back then, 160, 175 pounds maybe. But I fill the cockpit up a little bit more, and I just, if that would have been me, I'd have been dead. And as the days went on, and of course we're fighting pneumonia, I was staying in touch with everything, and I did talk to his wife at the hospital, and of course, she was pretty upset that night. And she came up and gave me a hug and just said, "Thank you for all you tried to do out there." And it's like, man, I just praying that this guy is going to make it. And once he got to about the third day, I knew his odds were getting in his favor at that point. And I can tell you right now, probably the sole reason that Doug Wolfgang survived that was because he was in extremely good physical condition. I mean, I watched the guy go out there and do 500 sit-ups by the poolside, and he's the one that taught me doing jumping jacks for upper body strength and conditioning. And he'd do 1,000 jumping jacks a day, and he'd run. I mean, the guy was incredible physical condition. That's probably why he survived that deal. And as time went on, we did fundraisers and some stuff like that. And of course, then the articles came out, and I was at a couple years after that. I'm going to probably bounce around a little bit, just things that happened after the fire. But a couple years after that, I saw Doug later that year. He came to one of our races in his wheelchair and got to visit with him a little bit. And, his feet and ankles were pretty messed up, and he lost the end of the one finger and everything. But, he, the thing that made Doug heal up too is his desire to get back in a race car. And, I know that it was just a couple years after that is when he filed the lawsuit. And I talked to him about it. And he said, "You can hate me like everybody else hates me, Steve." But he said, "I got to make this sport safe. So if my son ever wants to be a race car driver, it's got to get safe." And I said, "Doug, I don't hate you, man. I saw what went on." To back up, I remember some stuff too that happened when we had Doug on the ground and I was starting to cut his suit off. In behind the racetrack was a concrete mixing company, had concrete trucks and stuff. They'd called over there and they actually drove. This is how long it took to get him out of the car. They drove a concrete truck around into the infield and brought it up. And the guy brought the washdown hose. They used to wash the chutes down when they're done pouring concrete. He brought the washdown hose over like he was going to spray Doug with it. And, we just then had just gotten him out of the car. They had enough time to call there and tell him to bring something over the water. And they brought a cement truck over there. And I yelled at Art from Working Wood. I said, "Get that effing hose out of here." Because, it's contaminated water and you got open wounds and stuff like that. But, it was just one of the chaotic things that happened. And I bring that up because later after the lawsuit was filed and all the articles were coming out and stuff, their defense was we had plenty of firefighting equipment. We had water available. We had everything we needed, which was total bullshit. They did not. I've been a fireman for years. They did not have enough fire extinguishers. There's plenty of pictures when I went through the deposition. It showed the spent fire extinguishers laying on the ground. And the most you saw in any picture was 3 of them. And one of those was come off of Working Woody. And they weren't big ones. They were like 2.5 pound. There might have been a 5 pound. There was no big ones. They did not have enough firefighting equipment. It was just a practice day, and they weren't prepared. They were not. Doug told me, he says, "I'm suing them not because I wrecked." He said, "I take full responsibility. My fault, I wrecked, but they weren't prepared for a wreck." And he says, "I just got to make sure that this doesn't happen to somebody else." And so once the lawsuit was filed, obviously I got called into it because the fact I was involved in the accident, and I went back and did the deposition, and they were pushing pretty hard. Well, he signed the release, and all this stuff, which I stayed out of that. But some of the things they just come out with head nets. The company that made those, they made head nets and torque tube restraints. And they actually gave Doug one. They gave Mark Kinzer one. They gave me one to try them out. And Mark and I put ours in our car. Doug didn't have his head net in his car. Had he had that, his head probably would have whipped over to the right when he hit the wall. And, that's where it broke the vertebrae in his neck and probably what knocked him out. It might not have knocked him out. He might have been able to get himself out. We don't know that. And because when it hit the right rear, it broke the torque tube loose and everything. And so something come over and broke the fuel filter, whether it was his leg or the torque tube. I don't know what they ever determined on that. And they were saying that he didn't have his torque tube strap in, which was not mandatory. Again, it was something experimental that somebody'd come up with for us to try, and just a few of us actually had them in our cars. And during the deposition, they were trying to point out some stuff in a picture of his car, and because I told him, I says, well, it looks like he's got his torque tube strap in, and they tried to deny it. And I said, no. They said, that's just a shadow. I said, it's not a shadow. Look, here's your shadow direction on all this stuff. That you can see the torque tube strap was in there, because obviously some of their defense was that Doug was being just careless. They were trying to point out he was being careless and it's his fault, blah, blah, blah. But, looking at the pictures, I pointed out to him, I says, no, right here is the torque tube restraint. I says, it's not a shadow from the radius rod, because the shadow, look at the direction of all the other shadows on the car. They're going a different direction. There's no way that could have been a shadow. So, I did my deposition, and it caused some hard feelings between me and Ted Johnson. And Ted and I were very close. And I mean, Ted was just trying to protect his brand.
Yeah.
And he got after me pretty hard. I just told him, I said, Ted, I said, I just told the truth. I said, man, this is a bad deal. Let's make it better. And so time passed, that all healed up, and, we went back to being really good friends. And, but I was at the PRI show one time, and he's deceased now, but a very well-known TV commentator who I was friends with was walking with a whole group of people, and I saw him, and it's like, hey, so-and-so, hey, man, how you doing? We started talking. He turns around and introduced me to his 5 or 6 friends. Now, this is a friend of mine. He introduced me to his 5 or 6 friends. He goes, hey, everybody, this is Steve Beitler. He's the guy that saved Doug Wolfgang so he could come back and sue everybody. I freaking just walked off. I walked off. I never talked to him after that, and he passed away a few years after that, but I just couldn't believe that. And I got in some heated arguments with different people that, everybody knows the risk of getting in a race car. You should never sue. That's BS. And I said, you weren't there. You didn't see what happened. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I got in several heated arguments with people that, were against what Doug did. I totally understand why he did the lawsuit. And, they weren't prepared. They weren't ready. Whose fault is that? Well, the racetrack's fault, the organization's fault, and the racer's fault. I mean, we as racers, when we go to a racetrack, we shouldn't have to go around and check and be sure they got the right medical people and the right fire gear or whatever. We shouldn't have to do that. We got enough to worry about. That should be on the sanctioning body, and that should be on the racetracks. But we still have to be diligent to open our eyes and look around. I mean, I've been to a racetrack before. It's like, does anybody see an ambulance here? No. It's like, hey, where's the ambulance? Oh, it'll be here pretty quick. So, well, when it gets here, we'll start. I ain't going out there until it's here. And it's amazing how so many people think, well, it'll never happen to us. Let's just go ahead and race. We don't have an ambulance. Or somebody will have to go to the hospital and get checked out. They just want to go back race. It's like, no, you don't have an ambulance here. I mean, you get something that's real bad. You need medical treatment right now. You got to have it. But so, the safety has gotten a lot better. And there's some, I call them knee-jerk reactions after that. They started making all these safety valves, and then they wanted all these other fire protection stuff, and everybody had to have fire extinguishers in their trailers and a bunch of stuff like that, which I understand. And I think it's good to have the new rules they've got now with the onboard fire systems. I think it's a really good deal. I mean, obviously there were some kinks to work out because Macedo's wreck, his bottle got thrown clear out of the car and didn't do him any good to that crash at Knoxville. But I think it's really good because if you look at the sprint cars nowadays, they're letting them build the side panels higher and higher. And, most of these cars, I don't agree with this, but most of these cars, if you're flopped over on the left side, you're not getting out. You can't get out that right side and break the arm gear. And I mean, I pray that it never happens, but, it's going to be like the Earnhardt deal. When it happened to somebody really prominent, then they make changes. And right now, I'm telling you what, you can't get out of these race cars when they're laying on their left side. Very few people, maybe Buddy Kofoid and, GM and people that size can get out. But, guys like me and, Danny Dietrich and people like, big people that race, you can't get out of these race cars right now and you're stuck in there. And when I later on, when I quit racing full time, was at had my parts store. I used to help the racetrack at Skagit Speedway train the fire people, because even before I went out on the Outlaw Tour, I used to train the fire people up at Skagit. And the biggest thing I did was I'd bring them down and strap each one of them into a race car and roll it over 2 or 3 times in my yard, just the frame and with the seat and steering gear in it, and then lay it upside down, let them practice taking each other out. That way they had a sense of what maybe the driver sees when he's upside down and stuff. So I did a lot of training with our local. But when I came back, I started training them again. And then when I had the racetrack, that's the one thing I did. Was the first thing I went out and bought was a slip-in unit into a pickup, the same one that's approved for NHRA for their fire and their safety safari. I bought one of them the first year I had the racetrack, because there was no way I was going to have a catastrophic event like that at my racetrack. And we had lots of fire extinguishers and lots of help every week. All my help were all volunteer firefighters from different agencies around our community. And I used, when Harley White got burnt in that mini sprint accident, I think it was like her first night out racing and stuff, I used that film for a training film on what not to do when we fight a fire. Because if you ever watch her film, when she's on fire, they all run up to her. Most of them were in short sleeve shirts. They start spraying and they push the fire right back into the race car. They push the fire right up into the race car. And every night I have a meeting with my officials at Skagit Speedway. We cover the basics, and every night I tell them, if we get a fire, don't worry about putting the fire out. Get in there and push the fire away from the driver. Just push it away from the driver, let it burn until we get the driver out, then put it out. And a lot of people, they just see, I saw that at the NARC race last year down in, I don't remember if it was in Medford or wherever it was, when they had the one fire, and the gal was in the car for quite a while.
Rodriguez, I think it was.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. And you can see the one guy coming up, and the fire's still going. He's in a t-shirt, and he's 20 feet away, and he starts spraying and pushes it right up under the car. It's like, come on, you people, you got a body in there, and it's hot. And so there's things that's simple enough that, that I taught him at Skagit also. If we get a crash and the tank's broke and it's running fuel out, take the cap off. We used cold fire and some chemical stuff like that with our we had the Purple K also, but for the dry ones. But problem with the dry ones, just like the accident we just spoke of, you get a bunch of that powder up in their helmets and stuff. They literally choke to death on the powder. So we used a lot of water-based pressure cans with fire out and some chemicals like that. But I said, if you got a broken line that's pouring fuel out, pop the cap off and dump a bottle full in there. Empty one of your water. You got 5-gallon pressurized water tanks with fire out in them. Put one of them right in the tank, because then it dilutes the fuel that's in it. Most people wait till it runs out and catches on fire and try to put it out. If you pop the cap off, stick your nozzle in there and dump it. The tank's already messed up. It's got the fitting tore off it or whatever. Worst case scenario, if it didn't hurt the bladder, all I got to do is wash it out. But you dump some of that solution inside the tank, and it neutralizes the fuel. So when the fuel comes out, it doesn't want to ignite. And it's, stop the problem before it happens. Just like when Montoya,
Juan Pablo.
Yeah, when he hit that dryer, I watched some guys trying to put the fire out. You guys go right to the machine and put it out at the machine and stop where it's coming out of the fuel tank. Put it out there. They're putting it out as it run down the track. It's like chasing after the cows after they got out. Just go close the gate. Sometimes it's just the training and the thoughts these people have is pretty ridiculous. But anyhow, I think that we've gotten so much safer with Hans devices, these seats we've got nowadays. The onboard fire systems is a great thing to have, and safety's come a long ways. And really, if you look back, it all started back with the Doug Wolfgang fire, and it's sad that you have to hurt a celebrity before the industry really wakes up. I mean, look at what's happened since Dale Earnhardt, and I mean, it's just sad that we have. If that had been some weekend warrior in a little racetrack, unknown area of the country, that the Doug Wolfgang accident happened to, have been, oh yeah, well, the guy got burned up, he did blah blah blah, he didn't do something right. It'd have been swept under the rug. But it's just sad that we have to, have a celebrity, a prominent person get hurt before the industry wakes up.
So I got a bunch of questions. Did you have to bend the seat to get him out?
Yes. I pulled that's what I'm saying, the hunt seats, because they're just a single layer with a little tube around the left side,
Okay.
because the left side doesn't wrap around as far as the right side does, obviously. But, of course, you got adrenaline running, and I was pretty physical, and I just grabbed the seat and had to pull the seat back to get him enough to where he could get out of it because his seat's real small. Doug wasn't a real big guy. And we
No.
had to pull the left side of the seat back is how we got him out.
I mean, I don't know how many people. Thank you, because Doug Wolfgang was growing up. The reason I went to sprint car races in 1984 for the first time was I saw a commercial. I went to Silver Springs and saw Super Sportsman a lot and modifieds. And I was sitting in my grandmother's, living room. I was 12 years old, and a commercial came on, and I just liked the name Doug Wolfgang. So that's why I went to my first 410 show at Williams Grove. So obviously that was my guy. So, and everything I've read, you've given the best account that I can remember from everything I've read. If not for you or Mark Kinzer, he probably wouldn't be here.
There's a lot of people trying to help, but even his daughter's boyfriend, I can't remember his name now, but he got his arms burnt in a couple places because he was trying to get in there, but he had a T-shirt on. And one of the places that was burnt was where he pushed it against the roll bars. That's how hot the roll bars were. It blistered his arm in the exact area of a roll bar where it touched it, like touching hot headers and stuff. And I mean, there's probably a lot more details that I've left out going through this just because I just breezed over it. But the fact that what happened, I mean, it was a pretty hideous deal and something that should have never happened. Doug was at fault for continuing on after the yellow come out. He openly admits that. Everybody knows it. But there ain't a driver out there that hasn't run her into an extra corner when you get
Yeah.
held up by a slow car. And he got into three, and I remember the rear skated just a little bit, and with the asphalt, as soon as they lock down, you're going whatever direction that car's pointing. Well, it was pointed toward the infield a little bit. And I've never been a fan of big Ute tires, at least not right out on the edge of the track. And I've had a couple tracks where we had to use tires to keep people from cutting the corners, but I try to keep them back off the track a little way, so at least you got some wiggle room to get out of trouble. And so I'm just glad that Doug was able to come back and race after that. The Christmas after that fire, he sent me a gift because my suit got burnt. My suit burned enough where it took all the color out of it and had all the threading and stuff on the lower half done. So I sent it back and they put a new bottom half on my suit. And that year I got a Christmas present in the mail from Doug, and it was a brand new driver suit with the card. I still have the card he sent with it, and him and his wife both wrote a note in there, which is private. And he did say, "Look inside the chest panel on the driver suit." And he had something. He had a note embroidered on a piece of cloth inside the driver suit from him to me, and it was so special. I still got that driver suit. I'll never ever get rid of it. I've never wore it. I've kept it, and it's just something special that means a lot to me. And what he said meant a lot to me.
You were burned, obviously. Uh, how bad was that? How long till you were healed up from that incident?
Well, I had blistered all my fingers and palms and the back of my hands were blistered, and mostly second degree. Some of them had popped and got into the third degree. So they packed them all. They wrapped all my hands up in gauze and they put the plastic gloves over my hands. And I raced the next day because I had to. I was broke. I needed the money. I made the main, but there wasn't that many cars there, and I didn't do that good. But I had to race the next day, and I mean it hurt like hell, and I couldn't hardly hang on the steering wheel. But got to get a paycheck. Luckily, we had the week off. The next race was at Eldora, and I went up there, and I still had the gauze on all my fingers, and my leg was wrapped up, and fortunately, we got to Eldora and it started snowing, so they canceled the race. So it gave me another week to kind of get healed up. But it was a good month before my fingers were healed up all the way. But I had to, put salve on them every night, rewrap them, and they showed me some exercises to do with my fingers so that the skin didn't grow tight and things like that.
I've always been, uh, as I got older, I read a lot about the lawsuit and whatnot. And from what I gather, he wanted a safety crew out there. That's one of the things that he was looking for. It's different when you're the outside looking in. You were not on the outside looking in. You were a part of this. How difficult all these years, you mentioned your friend at PRI, but even in the years, 5 years while, after the lawsuit was filed, how difficult was it for you to kind of hear people go after him about it? Some of the comments, I'm sure you received some comments that probably weren't very nice as well. How difficult was it for you to deal with all that, especially since you were there and directly involved with it?
Well, it set me off every time. I mean, um, I've been accused of having a short fuse or even accused of having no fuse sometimes. If I hear somebody trashing them, man, I freaking lit up. I'm ready to fight. And that's just how I was. I was not going to pussyfoot around it. I was not going to pacify people that didn't know. I'd get right in their face and tell them, you don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. I was. You have no idea. Yeah, but you don't sue people. You take that. You said, no, you don't know. I mean, I get right in their face. I don't care who they were. Strangers. I mean, that didn't happen a lot. A few people, arrogant asses, know-it-alls that are, the type of people you see on message boards back in the day. There was no
Yeah.
message boards back then. We didn't even have internet yet, but um, I wouldn't tolerate it. So it was few and far between, but you always remember the worst stuff. But I had so many people come up. I've had people come up to me in tears and give me hugs and say, Doug Wolfgang's my hero and thank you for what you did. And I mean, Kenny Schrader called me, the next day. I mean, I barely even knew Kenny. I mean, I knew who he was because he'd just come out of the USAC and the sprint cars and was down really doing well in NASCAR land. And all of a sudden, I get a call on my recorder from him and just thank me for all I did. He says, if there's anything you need, if there's anything I can do for you, please call me. And at the time, I was pretty emotional over the whole deal. I didn't want to call him. I didn't want to talk to him about it. That show back in the day, I think it was called like Emergency 911 or something, where they did the TV show about catastrophes that happen and real life heroes that come in and help them. They called me several times wanting me to do the show about it, and I refused to do it. I said, no, we're not going to sensationalize this, and I couldn't do it, And so Chris Economaki called me and he says, I'm going to nominate you for the Carnegie heroism medal or whatever was the Carnegie people have.
Mhm.
And I thought that was very generous of him to do that. I never really heard anything after that, but he said he wanted to nominate me for that. And me and Mark both, of course. Mark Kinzer was he was a big part of it. And Mark and I talked about it a lot afterwards, and we both agreed. I mean, man, if that had been me, I'd have been in deep crap. So, but it's it's a part of our history now, and a lot more people over the years. There's still people that come up to me now and talk about it. Just say, man, growing up, Doug was my hero. Thank you so much for what you did. I mean, we're over 30 years ago, and they still talk about it. I said, when I was in Volusia, I had a guy stand in line getting ice cream to come up and told me when he was 10 years old, I let him sit in my race car, and he's never forgot that. Now he's got kids that age, and we talked about the Doug deal a little bit too, and how that was one of his heroes. And so, it's been pretty positive, most of it.
Well, I'm saying thank you as well because, like I said, that was my guy. When I was really, it's how I got into sprint car racing and liking sprint car racing. Um, how did that incident aside, the fact that I mean, we know about Skagit, you were a driver, you've seen all aspects of it, and then have that happen. How did that kind of shape how you felt about safety moving forward, both as a driver and as an eventual owner and promoter of a racetrack?
Well, it made me definitely be aware of racing and stuff, And when I was racing, I didn't put roll bar padding on back in the days because we didn't have full containment seats. I mean, I did have the right side head net on when Doug had his accident. I liked it because, give me something to lean my head against, especially early in the year when you're a little bit out of shape, and those, You start the season at Silver Dollar Speedway out there in Chico, and you run a 40-lap race on a little bull ring, you're wore out. Your neck's wore out. But I actually went and started putting double head nets on for that reason. So moving forward, when I had the racetrack, I had zero tolerance for anybody that didn't want to be safe. And, I tell them in the driver's meeting, put your Nomex underwear on. I said, you think it's hot out today, it's going to be a lot hotter when your car's on fire. And I try to explain to these people that, well, I got a triple layer suit. What a lot of people don't understand is the outer layers keep the flames off you. That's what they're designed for. The inner layers is what keeps the heat off of you. That's called insulation. You put insulation in the walls of your house so it stops the heat transfer from one way or the other. It either holds it in on a cold day or it holds it out on a hot day. So people that, I don't care if you got a triple layer suit, putting the Nomex underwear on underneath of it, or they got a couple other brands now, but putting that underneath, all that's designed to do is help keep the heat off of you. Flames will never get to you. If the flames ever burn through a triple layer suit, it don't matter, you're done. But the outer layer keeps the flames off. The inner layers, however many you got, keeps the heat off. And it's the heat that'll kill you, not the flames. It's the heat that cooks you and kills you.
So you obviously all these years, we have something going on now where the fuel tanks are flying. Where do you come out on this fuel tank issue? I know there's a lot of different thoughts. A lot of drivers don't want them tethered to the car because obviously it's like, I guess, having a bomb on you. And then while others are like, okay, you got to have them tethered on because they fly into the stands. We've had that happen. So where are you on the whole fuel tank issue? And we saw a lot of it. I think it was last year, really the last couple of years, with issues with the fuel tanks rupturing and whatnot. Where do you come? What's your stance on all of that?
Well, I actually sat in this year at Knoxville. Every year they have a car owner meeting at Knoxville with all the track promoters during the Nationals. I sat in on it this year, and that was the big topic about the fuel tanks coming off and stuff. And one of the drivers present, he goes, well, if I get in a big wreck, I want that fuel tank out of there. And I'll tell you what, the promoters got right after him and said, we don't want them in our grandstands. I mean, that'll ruin a racetrack. You sail a front axle, you sail a fuel tank into the grandstands on fire, it's going to ruin your business. Here's the problem, and I was actually shocked because when I had my parts store, I sold obviously fuel cells and stuff. I was shocked when they passed around a bladder at that meeting. They're like freaking silk. There's nothing to them. You can used to be it'd take 2 men and a gorilla to fold a bladder up and stuff it in a tank. It was a job. Now you can wad one of them up and put it in your pocket just about. What I'm getting at is over the years, everybody wants to be light, cheap, cheap, cheap. They've thinned up the thickness of the shells. They've made the bladders extremely lightweight. Well, the only way you can make them lightweight is either using a different material that's a very lightweight material or not put as much material in them. And these bladders they've got now are so thin, and the fuel tanks themselves, the shells are getting thinner because obviously if you make them a little bit thinner, you don't have to put so much plastic in the mold, so it doesn't cost so much to produce them. So that was a big thing they talked about. And they're talking about, adding more mounting points to them and better mounting systems to them. The two things that I think we really need, the big problem is with these tanks is in some of the wrecks, the rotor or the rear end coming up and hitting them, and especially the quick change nuts on the rear cover, because they're a high crown nut, so it's easy to get a socket on them to change your gears.
Yeah.
They come up and tear the tank. I mean, a simple fix for it, if they're going to keep the tanks mounted the way they are and keep the shape, because there's just not a lot of clearance around the rear end, the rear cover, and the rotor, is they need to make some kind of a shield that would attach to the tank up underneath, whether it's, I don't know that carbon fiber is the right thing, just because the fact it's strong, but it still can be punctured. Whether they get something molded in a thin stainless. When I had my cars, I always made a piece of stainless about 5 inches wide that wrapped up around the top of my tank where the rotor was. Because if you ever broke a torsion arm and your rotor's glowing hot, and if the tank falls down and sits on that rotor, it's going to melt right through it. So I always put a piece of stainless up there and pop rivet it to the tank, so that if the rotor, and there's marks on it every year. There's always marks on that where the rotor would come up and hit it. So if they could build some kind of a shield to protect that tank from the rear end flopping around back there and puncturing it, that would help. But, I believe they need to keep the tanks on the cars. I know that as a driver, you get in a bad one. Yeah, it's nice to know your biggest fear as a driver is catching on fire. Catching on fire, getting hit in the cage when you're tipping over is the two biggest fears I ever had as a driver. And I got pinned in a car at Chico in 1984. I got in a bad crash and broke the torque tube and had my leg smashed up into the U-joint. I was pinned in the car. And I remember, don't let it catch on fire. I was panicking because I couldn't get out. And they assured me it's not going to catch on fire. Well, I understand a driver wanting that tank to get away from the race car, but you can't have a firebomb flying around through space and not knowing where it's going to go. I think they need to make the shells maybe a little stronger. Let's toughen the bladders back up. I mean, they've already got so damned expensive. If you got to spend another $200 or $300 on it, it's not going to break the bank. Toughen the bladders up a lot more. Maybe come up with some kind of a protective shield that's molded to the bottom of the shell that stops the rear cover nuts or the rotor or the rear end from penetrating it and puncturing it. I also think they need to come up with some kind of a check valve where your main fuel line goes in, that if like a breakaway valve, so if the tank does either fly off or comes unlodged and it breaks that line loose from the tank, there's something that shuts the fuel flow off right there. I mean, they make them at gas stations. You leave the handle in your car and drive off, it pops the hose loose, and there's a valve right there that shuts off the fuel flow at the gas pump so it can't keep running. So I know the technology's out there. We just got to find some way to incorporate that into sprint cars. So if the tank flies off, it's not going to just free flow fuel out of it. And if it's still on the car and it's been torn loose, it'll stop the fuel flow from running out.
Why is it, and I wonder this all the time, I've said it publicly, why is, I don't know about late models, but I'll use sprint car racing. Why is it so far behind the times? Why does it take, I guess racing in general, because it happened with Earnhardt, why does it take somebody getting, seriously injured or killed, God forbid, for something to happen? Why are we so reactive instead of proactive?
Probably the biggest reason why on a lot of that, first and foremost, there's two reasons. I think one, so many people are in denial. Well, that's not going to happen to me. Okay, everybody's in denial of that. The second reason is, well, that's going to add too much cost. We're driving up and down the highway and $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 tow rigs nowadays, and they're worried about a couple $1,000 here and a couple $1,000 there. Granted, that's your top end elite teams. When you trickle down to the guy that's got the old beat up Ford pickup and an open trailer trying to get to the racetrack, a couple $1,000 is going to really affect his program. But even when I had the track, I was a stickler on safety, and one of my good friends, I won't name his name because we all know him, he'd come to the track. He refused to put roll bar padding on. He'd say, Steve, my head gets that far, I'm dead anyhow. I said, you wouldn't believe how far your head will stretch. I've seen pictures. I said, listen, you're not racing without roll bar padding because we didn't have wraparound seats back then.
Right.
I said, you got two little boys at home that expect you to come home every night and see them and not be fed through a straw. I said, you're not racing to put roll bar padding on, quit arguing. He went over, got roll bar padding and put it on. They don't realize that, it's not just them it affects. If you hit your head and messes your brain all up, it's not just you it affects, it's your whole family, your friends, your livelihood, your job, your income. And because they didn't want to go spend $6.99 for some roll bar padding or whatever it cost back in the day, Now we don't have to worry about it because of the seats we've got and all that stuff. But, back then, Kerry Patterson, that's what happened to him. He hit his head on the roll bars 2 or 3 times, and that's all it wrote. And, I've hit my head on roll bars before. I'm telling you what, it ain't pleasant.
Well, and look, I'll go to probably 100 races this year. I can count on one hand, even at the local level. Well, I don't even see any in Central PA locally, an open trailer with a pickup. They all have trailers.
Right.
And even the smaller ones are not cheap now.
Right.
And, but yet they'll spend $1,500 getting their helmet painted, or they'll spend, $1,200, or they'll get the nicest vinyl wrap or whatever on their car or whatever it is. I just don't understand. And like you said, you brought up something with earlier, what there was an incident that happened in Orange County. The track was really wet or whatever. It was unsafe. Sammy Swindell, I'm not racing, blah, 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 blah. He had them all together, but as soon as they asked him to come up out for hot laps, all those same guys got in their car and came out because Sammy Swindell wasn't going to run. Why can't drivers, they have all the power. They, that's it. Why can't drivers band together more than they do? And that's from back in the day to 2025.
I've been around this racing game a long time, and I remember there was one time we're going to have a boycott. Back when I first started racing at Skagit, we had a club, Skagit Hardtop Racing Association was called, and they had a big meeting at a guy's house, and we're going to boycott Skagit if we don't get paid more money. Okay, we're all boycotting this week.
Yeah.
Guess what? They all lined up. They was all headed to the pits. One guy boycotted. And that's only because his wife was so mad at him, threatening to boycott. She wouldn't let him take his car in the pits. His wife kind of ruled the roost on that one, but she made him park his car. Said, "Yope, you said you're boycotting." He goes, "But everybody else is going in the pits because I don't care." She was mad at him for threatening to boycott, and you know, kind of like the Sammy Swindell story. Gosh, Sammy's not here. That I know I can win now if he's not here, and getting the racers. I don't like boycotts. I don't like strikes. Don't go on
No.
strike. If you don't like your job, quit and get a different job. But I think if there's that kind of a problem, a group of them need to go meet with the promoter or the series director or something. Say, look, we've got a big problem that needs to be addressed because we're not going to keep doing this way. And give them a chance to fix it. I've had racers come to me and say, "Hey, there's something wrong here. We got to fix this." It's like, whoa, okay, I didn't realize it was quite to that point, but let's take a look at it. And you modify or you fix it. It's got to work both ways. But, if the track's not ready, I'm not going to send a car out there when the track's not ready. If I do, I'll tell them to check it. If it ain't good, I'm going to I can watch them. I know when the track's right or not because I've been a driver long enough. I'm not going to put them out just because I want to get the show going. And it's hard because everybody's an independent contractor. I mean, we're not all playing on the same team. We're all independents, like having 24 different teams in a football game all playing at the same time. You're not going to get them all to agree because some of them are personal friends with the promoter or personal friends with the race director, whatever it is. They're going to support them no matter what. And others think, well, those 6 guys boycott and don't show up or ain't going to race. I'm going to because that just moves me up in the chow line. So it's sad that has to get to that point, but I think there's some other alternatives before it ever gets to that point.
Yeah, I would agree. And the only time is safety at a track. I mean, obviously that's something I'm a stickler for, and things I see and whatnot, like racing when it's raining.
Yeah.
I saw that. Well, I'll be honest about it. I've talked about it enough. As Williams Grove, we had the fog thing last year, and then a couple years before that, they ran 10 laps in an A main when it was a pretty good drizzle, and you're tempting fate. I think that's where I'm at. You're tempting fate, and if something can happen, it will happen.
You're exactly right. And as a promoter, trust me, I've had those nights. It's like, I want to get halfway through this race. I got to get halfway. But you can watch a good promoter or race director can't be down at ground level in the pits. You're too close to the action to see what's going on. I always stood on top, except for the very last year. I stood on top of my control tower, which is above the announcer's booth. So you got a good bird's eye view looking down on the track. And you can see when the cars are starting to slide around. I mean, when they're racing and it starts drizzling, they can usually keep the track for quite a while until it gets actual drops coming down. And that's a fine line call to get enough laps in to call it a race or the safety of the drivers. And the first time you see them starting to slide, you got to go yellow. You got to watch out. First and foremost, you got to watch out for your drivers. And I mean, I had a race one time, it was 25 laps. We got about 10 or 11 in. I just called it a completed race, paid all the drivers and sent them away. And the ones in the back were bitching, and we didn't make it halfway. I said, well, you weren't going to go to the front anyhow. Here's your money. Go home. See you next week.
And they were back the next week. And they were back.
First and foremost, the promoter, the race director, I was both. And I also got to watch out for the bottom line. So it's in my best interest to protect my racers so they can come back the next week. And I'm not going to endanger the racers just to try to, get a few more laps in.
Have you received, I mean, even in the last, I don't know how many years, have you received calls from uh, people kind of to get your expertise on stuff, or is it just, or is that not happened?
No, actually, I get a lot of calls. I got a lot of
Good.
friends. Steve Sinclair, he has the IRA Racing Series. He's
Yep.
one of my best friends in the industry. And of course, he works for K&K Insurance, and he deals with somewhere around 160 tracks a year. And he's told me several times I should really get into consulting. He says I know enough tracks would hire you. You know, I like doing that. I don't know that I'm looking for a full-time job again. So, but I help a lot of tracks that have called me, and mainly on the marketing and promotions and advertising, sponsorships, and things like that. I actually had a guy from Indianapolis call me a couple of years ago. He was referred to me. He was trying to start an IndyCar team, a low buck IndyCar team, and wanted help with advertising and how to get sponsors. And I spent 2 hours on the phone with the guy, and he kind of got close, but it never materialized because the amount of money it was going to take. But I mean, I give my number out all the time to people, and I still go to the promoters conferences. I was on the panel in Daytona this year with the other national promoters of the year, and we answer questions that are brought up, and I always every year I meet new people and I give my number. There's a girl that I met down there that's she's doing the marketing stuff for a motorcycle drag racing series out of the Maine Northeast area. So I've sent her quite a bit of information in the last few weeks since I met her, just trying to help her, do her job better. So yeah, I could probably make some pretty good money if I went full time consulting, but I'll just give it away. If somebody wants help and they call, I'm going to help them. It's just how I am. I want to see the sport do better, and I want to see promoters do better.
Well, I feel you've made the sport better just in your contribution. And I think if anybody wants your number, I'll ask you and then I'll give it to them because
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
think they should definitely be calling you about fire and how I see things at tracks. I just shake my head. And I'm not a fireman, so but I know it's not right. So, Steve, I really really appreciate you joining us again and for sharing that story. I know it's a difficult story. It's probably not
Still
something.
is after 30 years. It's
Yes.
still it's still tough, and it's every time I see Doug. I mean, we can be 30 feet apart. If he sees me, he makes a beeline right over and gives me a hug and how you doing? How you been doing? And he's never forgot that either. And his wife and kids. And I won a race one time. A quick story: when I got done with the Outlaws, I located Knoxville, and Doug was pretty much getting healed up and everything.
Hmm.
And anyhow, I went up to Houston one night and I won the feature. As I pulled up into victory lane, I didn't hardly have my helmet off. The first guy out there was Doug. Ran out there all excited, give me a big hug. He goes, "Yeah, this is what life's all about, ain't it?" It's like that was like right on. That was so cool. He was probably more excited that I won the feature than I was, but he just had to come out and share that. He's yelling at me, "This is what life's all about." I thought that was pretty cool. And being an EMT, the first time you do CPR on a dead person was my school bus driver from grade school. He
Oh
was
my
dead.
word.
We did CPR on him, got him going, and about a month later, I'm downtown, little town I live in, about the size of Knoxville, Cedar Woolley. I seen him walking down the sidewalk, and that feeling that I got, seeing that man had life, and I had something to do with it. There's no feeling in the world. And I have seriously, in my lifetime, performed CPR and life-saving measures on over a dozen people that were dead that came back, including one of my officials that had a heart attack in front of everybody during the national anthem. We was out doing it in the ambulance for over an hour, and he
Jeez.
lived. So there's nothing like the gratification of being able to help somebody and see them in life later, knowing that you had a little something to do with them, their life continuing on, and all the great things they're going to accomplish that they wouldn't have been able to had you not got involved. Everybody has a fight or flight response. I've seen people freaking run. There's something somebody needs help, they're running away. And it's like, you got to help him. And that's just, maybe my training from the fire department. And, I really wanted to be a paramedic, but like I said in our last interview, I quit all that to go racing. That's what I really wanted to do. But you never
Right.
forget that training and, just make things better around you.
Well, you've definitely done that. And again, I appreciate you so much for coming on again. And again, it's just to share that story and then also talk about some safety. So, Steve, again, thank you very much. And I appreciate you being on.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate being on here. And, if somebody watches this and it just makes them go look at the racetrack a little bit different, whether you're a racer that will calmly sit down with the promoter and say, I think we've got an issue we really need to address, and here's why. Give the promoter a chance to fix something. Or if you're a promoter and you see this and you look around and realize, what, I can do a better job than what I'm doing, and do it. Promoters are no different than racers. They're all struggling to make a living doing this at most levels. And sometimes they don't want to spend the money because they don't think they've got it. But when it comes down to it, they can spend it if they just do it. And that's the little things, like I said before, pennies add up to dollars. Little improvements to your racetrack, little improvements to your race team pay big dividends down the road.
Yeah, it could save your life.
Absolutely. Save your business. Absolutely.
Steve, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate you calling. And, I'm always happy to help out. I love this industry, and I want to be 110 years old hanging out at racetracks.
Well, I want you there too. So. That's going to wrap up another edition of the SprintCarLimited.com Deep Dive presented by Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA. Again, a big thank you to Steve Beitler. I know it was a tough story to rehash after 33 years, and I appreciate him being on again. If you like the content on our YouTube channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You can check out our daily exclusive content at SprintCarLimited.com. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Deep Dive.